think we're going to begin. Hi everyone, my name is Pierce and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series here at Brookline Booksmith and your host for tonight's conversation. I want to open up the space by saying thank you for coming out tonight. The Booksmith has been around since 1961 and that's because of our wonderful community. Your support means we keep having events like this, so thank you again. As you may know, tonight's event is part of our ongoing Transnational Literature Series, which focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. If you enjoyed tonight's event, please check out our full events lineup online at brooklinebooksmith.com. See what some of the amazing authors we have coming up this spring, both virtually and in store. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram for updates. Toward the end of the event, we leave about 15 minutes or so for an audience Q&A followed by a signing. We have copies of The Good Deed available over at the registry. And please take a moment to silence your cell phones. I think that takes care of the business end of things. Now I'd love to tell you a little bit about our guests. Tonight I have the very great honor of introducing Helen Benedict and Margot Livesey, here to discuss and celebrate the release of Helen's new novel, The Good Deed, a nuanced and immensely thoughtful story of displacement and belonging. It is undoubtedly an essential novel for our times. Helen Benedict is the author of 7 previous novels, 6 works of nonfiction, and a play. Her newest novel that we are celebrating tonight, The Good Deed, was hailed by Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, and Booklist, and comes out of the research she conducted for her 2022 nonfiction book, Map of Hope and Sorrow, which earned Penn's Gene Stein Grant for Literary Oral History in 2021. A recipient of the Ida B. Wells Award for Bravery in Journalism and the James Aronson Award for Social Justice Journalism, she is also the author of The Lonely Soldier, The Private War of Women Serving in Iraq. Her writings inspired a class action suit against the Pentagon on behalf of those sexually assaulted in the military, and the 2012 Oscar-nominated documentary, The Invisible War. She teaches at Columbia University. And tonight's moderator, Margot Livesey, grew up on the edge of the Scottish Highlands and has taught in numerous writing programs, including at Emerson College and Boston University, among many others. She is the author of a collection of stories and 9 novels, including Eva Moves the Furniture, The Flight of Gemma Hardy, and The Boy in the Field. Her book, The Hidden Machinery, Essays on Writing, was published in 2017. She is a professor at the Iowa Writers' Workshop and goes back to Scotland whenever she can. Her new novel, The Road from Belhaven, came out in February. I'm so pleased to have them here together in conversation. Now Helen and Margot.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. It's great to see you. I'm going to just read a little bit from the beginning and then we're going to dive into the conversation. But first I want to send out special thanks to an amazing person who's sitting in the audience, who is the person who designed this very, very beautiful cover. Her name is Suzanne Gaynor and she should take a bow. Okay. The novel's told in several voices, most of whom are refugees living in a camp on this island in Greece you'll hear about, but one of whom is an American tourist. Her name is Hilma and she opens the novel, so I'll just start with a bit from the beginning. Hilma. The sea around this island is so brazenly blue it puts even the unblemished sky to shame. How mystifying it is that the ancient Greeks had no word for the color, wine dark sea, like living in a forest and having no word for tree. I am without canvases here, my brushes forever abandoned. But were I a painter still, I would be afraid of this blue, afraid that I could never render it even in abstract, because the sea here is an ever-spinning wall of blues. Turquoise, aqua, cyan, indigo, cerulean, slate, all overlaid by darts of black and white, amethyst and silver, verdigris, rose and violet, constantly changing with light and current. To capture this, one would need a moving painting, not video, but oil. A flood of multicolored oil streaming over the canvas, lit by an Aegean sun. I'm watching these blues from the mountain apartment I rented through Airbnb, its stone terrace veined in gold. Every evening, I sit here with a glass of wine, looking over the bay to Vathi, the town on the far side, heaped like a jumble of sugar cubes at the bottom of Mount Theos, a town that my host, a gnarly Greek with the voice of a frog, lost no time in telling me, holds the most overcrowded refugee camp in Europe. These people, they come here from Africa to get rich, and so many are thieves, Miss Helma, he insisted, pronouncing H in my name with the same guttural splutter with which my grandmother used to pronounce Hanukkah. In fact, as a quick Google in my phone affirms, by far the majority of the people in the camp are Syrian. But I didn't come here to argue with Airbnb hosts or anyone else. I came to recuperate, doctor's orders. Why I chose to do my recuperating on an island with a refugee camp is simple. I didn't know. I don't read about tragic matters anymore. I used to when I was the person before the person I am now, not any longer. No, I chose to come here to Samos because I'm interested in the mathematician and philosopher Pythagoras, and this was his supposed birthplace. Because I fancied the view of the Turkish mountains poking up behind Vathi. I came because myth has it that Aesop of the Fables talked his way out of slavery here, and because this is Greece and therefore timeless. I came for the Aegean blues. If Theo, my son, had not stopped speaking to me, I would invite him to join me here. As a boy, he had a passion for the sea, the sing and sway of it, the fish little colourful packages put there he used to think just for him. He would have loved the beaches, with their multicoloured pebbles as perfect as eggs, the sea as clear as a mermaid's eyes. Lynette would have loved it too, but Lynette is forbidden. Theo not only refuses to speak to me, he won't look at me either. The last time I was in his presence, in a Manhattan courtroom, he turned his head away and stared at the wall. The sea is choppy this morning, last night having delivered the most brutal storm I've witnessed yet on Samos. The wind yowling and hammering at my shutters like a banshee, the waves sucking in great breaths and spitting them out again with a crash against the pebbled shore. But the air is already heating back up to its July highs, so in I wade, battling the surf, and head out to deeper waters where it looks calmer. How I love the weightlessness of swimming, the exhilaration of cutting unfettered through the waves, water crystalline and clean, those wagging fish, the sun projecting a light show on the seafloor, a spangling honeycomb of hexagons dancing over the sand, the brown seagrass rippling in the current like a field of wheat in the wind. I lose all sense of time and fly through the water as though it's as yielding as air. A splash dives into my snorkel tube, so I raise my head to empty the water out and take in where I am. Far, a great deal farther than I thought. I'm not tired, but I am sensible. Time to turn back. Just as I do, my eye catches a spot of colour, an orange object bobbing a short distance away. A boy, perhaps, or else a polluting plastic bag I feel obliged to remove. I swim closer. It's not a boy or a bag. It's a life jacket with somebody in it, a pitifully small somebody. A fist closes around me, pulling me to a halt, my breath suddenly short and airless. Not again, please. The little figure is ominously still, no sign of swimming or flailing, no movement at all. The fist grips tighter. With an effort, I wrench free of it and push myself closer. Then again, a fist. The water too is resisting me now, no longer as yielding as air, but viscous and stubborn as though I'm swimming through glue. I look around for a rescue boat. There is no rescue boat, no sign of anything but the endless azure, the ropes of waves and spume of whitecaps, a sea as wide as the earth. Fighting away the fist, I force myself to keep swimming. I've lost all my weightlessness now. I'm as heavy as cement. Be alive, please. When I'm close enough to call out, I spit away the snorkel. Hello? My words feeble against the great seethe of the sea. Hello? No response. Yasu, I try in Greek. Hello? Nothing. I swim closer, able to see the figure's face now. A tiny oval under a long tangle of wet black hair. A girl, a very little girl. Her eyes are closed, lips grey. She hangs suspended in a life jacket like a collapsed marionette. Please, please, be alive. No.
Thank you, Helen. I'll just keep repeating things. What a fantastic place to stop. What a heartbreaking place to stop. This is such an absorbing novel, such a compelling novel. And as I read it, one of the things I thought about was an essay you published soon after 9/11, if I'm remembering correctly, called The Frightened Muse.
Oh, wow.
In which I think you were in Paris at the time, and you were talking about how your muse had gone into hiding. But you also said in that essay very wonderfully that after 9/11, Americans were no longer special. That 9/11 made Americans more like everyone else. And I thought of that as I was reading The Good Deed, because one of the most powerful parts of the novel for me is the way that all the women have equally strong, equally vivid, intelligent, passionate voices. And I wonder if maybe you could talk about the journey of the novel and how you came to find those voices.
Yes, I mean, actually, there were two things that really inspired this whole idea of a story. One was, the first was this idea that women, a group of women friends, would be meeting to tell each other their story, the stories of their lives. And originally, I imagined that as happening in an imaginary prison, in an unexplained world, and they were whispering their stories through vents in the wall. So you can't steal that idea. I still think it's quite good. But I couldn't make it work. So I kind of abandoned it, and then I went to the refugee camp, and I thought this is the perfect place, because especially as I saw how when you've lost everything else, friendship and even your family, friendship is all you have left. And the bonds I saw people forming under those dire circumstances were and the amount of generosity people found to offer each other when they had nothing was so moving to me. So it made sense to make it very much about women telling their stories, and strong women, surviving women. And I don't want to fall into a cliche about strong women, because it's said too much about so we don't have to worry about them when they're going through horrible things. But a refugee has to be a very, very determined person to do what they've done, to escape, to leave everything behind, endure this terrible journey, and then make a new life in a place that doesn't want you.
And all of this is taking place on the island of Samos in Greece. And what sort of period of time should we think of this as happening?
It's 2018, which is when I first went there. So it's a few years after the Syrian war was in 2011, started in 2011, the civil war. And the first big exodus was was from then on, but especially 2015. But it was still going on in 2018, still going on now, but the world has turned its eyes away. So I decided to go where everybody else had lost interest, and so I went, and that's why I didn't go to Lesbos, which is the island that everybody might have read about. I went to Samos, which is another northern Aegean island, really, really near Turkey. You can literally see it, as I read, from the shores, because I discovered that it actually was even more overcrowded and more inhumane than the camp in Lesbos, but again, nobody was paying attention to it because it was smaller. So, yeah, but it's a stunning island, and that's the other thing, the juxtaposition of this gorgeous island with this cruel refugee camp in it that most tourists don't even know is there. It was, the irony was very biting.
Yeah, at one point, one of the women, I think it's Amina, describes the color of the sea, how radiant and how turquoise it is, and then says, but it smells like the grave. And the novel is full of those ironies, beginning with the title, which somehow it's hard to hear the title, The Good Deed, without hearing a question mark. I mean, maybe it's the times we live in that we don't trust that there will be an unequivocal good deed.
Well, I meant it to be ironic. I figured everyone would catch on. So, because who wants to write a novel that's all soupy and sugary about a good deed that actually works? But what I really had in mind was turning the white savior narrative on its head.
Yeah.
And that's what I do, pretty much in this novel. Yeah.
Did you have the title from the beginning? Was that what you were writing towards? Or did you poll people in cafes and pubs trying out different titles?
I usually have a hell of a time with titles, do you? It's so hard.
Yes, I'm stopping the driver of the 73 bus and saying, what do you think?
This one came fast. It didn't torture me as much as my titles often do. You know, I didn't say the second inspiration, I just realized, which is when I knew I was going to Samos, and this has to do with the quote about the sea stinking of the grave. I knew how many refugees had been falling off these terrible inflatable dinghies and drowning. And I got this fear. I love to swim, and I would go out swimming and I'd find a body of a drowned refugee. And that fear became enormous, almost enough to make me reconsider going. And I could pull yourself together, Helen, and then I turned it into a story. So that was the other thing that sort of started it.
And before you published The Good Deed, you published a non-fiction book about the refugee camp and some of the women you met there.
Yes, women and men. I originally went to Samos to research the novel, and I spent 5 weeks there the first time, and I went back many times over the following years, just to listen, to sit down with people who were willing to talk to me and listen. And I know from my training as a journalist, my other hat, that when you talk to people who've been through trauma, you don't immediately ask questions that open the trauma. So that was easier to do with a novel, because what I was after was the details of what it's like to live day by day in a refugee camp like this. How do you eat? How do you sleep? How do you wash your clothes? What do you do all day? You know, and they were all very happy to talk about that. And then as we got to know each other more, then out came more of their stories and more of their stories. And when I saw how dire their circumstances were, I felt I had to write non-fiction too, because I wanted to get the message out fast. It takes a long time to write a novel. So I started writing articles, and eventually I had hours and hours, months and months, years and years of interviews with several people I met, not all of them Syrian, also people from different countries in Africa. And I got together with a young Syrian man I met who was living in the camp, and he helped me interview people who spoke only Arabic, interpret for me. And he became my co-author, and we put together this collection of stories of 5 people, called Map of Hope and Sorrow, stories of refugees trapped in Greece. So that was the non-fiction part. But in fact, I wrote that after this. It just came out first for reasons to do with COVID and publishers and boring stuff like that.
Maybe this would be a good moment to let us hear the voice of one of the women.
Okay.
There are
This is
4
very
or
short.
5.
Yes, there are. But the first one, and maybe the main one, is Amina, who is from Syria. Down in the town here, Old men sit in their cafes, smoking cigarettes, playing dominoes, dice or cards, drinking ouzo or metaxa, coffee or sugar-laced tea. Talk and braggadocio, grizzle and gristle, legs spread to display the dangling insistence of testicles. Women swing past, lips glossed, shopping bags heavy, hair dyed a rusty red. Their children sleek and fat, careening by on bicycles, sucking on ice creams. Tourists come and go under sun hats and sunglasses, snapping photos, applying lotions, spending money. We, on the other hand, stay high up on the hill in a metal box, packed onto rows of bunk beds with 34 other people, like rolls of carpet on a merchant's shelf. Layla found us 2 bunks in the back corner, she and I on the lower levels, her sons, Hazem and Majid, boys as small and sharp as thorns above. Our only privacy, the grey blankets we hang around our bed frames, and the clothes we use to cover our bodies. Inside these, we pretend to have a home. Sometimes we look down at ourselves, shocked at how this place has changed us. Layla, a widow of not even 40, has grown bloated from the foul air and food here, her face as pale as wheat, hair greased for want of water. Our friend Nafisa, who sleeps alone in a tent outside, is not much older, but with her skin ashy and cheeks sunken, could pass for 80. As for me, I'm only 19, yet since I lost Mama and all I know, I feel as old as the moon.
Thank you. Amina is the youngest of the 4 women. Hilma is in her late 50s, 58, I think.
Yeah.
And Layla is maybe in...
She's about 45 or so.
About 40, and Nafisa might be any age between 35 and 60. But it's easy talking about something like the good deed to be almost overwhelmed by the material, by the real world behind the novel, but I'm really interested in your practice as a writer, and you said that writing fiction takes you longer than non-fiction. How do you go about writing fiction? Do you write every day? Do you write in between seeing your many students at Columbia? Do you have friends who read for you?
I suppose I write whenever I can, but most of it does get done in the summers and the winter break, like as happens with so many people who teach. I think having been a journalist for so long as well has been good for discipline. But being a mom has also been very good for discipline because you learn to grab what time you can and you can't wait around for inspiration or the right lighting or the right mood. No, that's out the window. What else did you... Oh yeah, I do have first readers. I do have a few people I always try it on before I give it to an agent or anything.
Is there any writerly advice you got as a young writer, or alternatively that you would give your younger self?
Just do it.
Just
Don't talk about it, just do it.
Is that what Leonard Michaels preached in his class?
No, I learned that from observation because, everybody I knew when I was young wanted to be a writer too, but only a few of us actually became writers, and the difference was much less to do with talent than just persistence. I really think persistence is not talked about enough.
And so when you say that fiction takes you longer than journalism, is that because you're going deeper into the characters, or because the sentences matter in a different way, or some combination?
I think it's because I'm exploring and discovering and learning as I write. Whereas with non-fiction, all that happens in the research. By the time I sit down, I know it all. And then it's a matter more like we're putting a 3-dimensional puzzle together is what it feels like. Whereas fiction is more like controlled daydreaming. And all the excitement of discovery happens in the writing. And then, of course, I'm there's the perfectionism, and yeah, the demands for good language are much higher than they are with non-fiction. Not that I don't try and write it as best I can, but it's got a slightly different master, if you like. You know, there's a different goal. With a non-fiction, it's about conveying facts and and of course, I always want to move people and stir them to action, because I do write about social justice issues. With non-fiction, I want to do all that and write it beautifully and make it literary, you know. So that's a lot to live up to. Yeah. But I think I also don't plot ahead of time. With non-fiction, I make an outline, and you know, it's so much more mechanical. With fiction, I write the first draft fairly fast, total mess, and then I rewrite for years, moving things around, cutting things out, starting again. You know, I'm sure this is familiar to anyone else who writes. It's just, yeah, it just takes much longer.
A writer named David Graham was a student of mine at Boston University years ago. He went on to write most recently The Wager and Killers of the Flower Moon, for instance. But he would come to my office in complete exasperation and say, I can write an 800-word column in an hour, Margot. And this whole week I've written 200 words that are of any use for my story. You know, so I think there's a long tradition of...
Yeah, I feel as if the two processes have used the two opposite sides of the brain almost. They're so different.
Yeah. And was one of the women easier to write or easier to get into than the others?
Maybe Amina was the easiest, because I've often written about young people, and she was the first one whose voice I wrote in. So I suppose I felt I knew her. I got to know her better earlier than the others. But that is not a very strong difference. Yeah.
They all feel very fully inhabited. I didn't mean as a reader I experienced them. But I just wondered as a writer if there were parts that were easier. And one of the things about the book is that it, in addition to telling each woman's story, is that it has a very strong plot. Was that a surprise to you? I mean, it was a surprise to me that there was such a strong plot.
It wasn't a surprise, because it needed a plot. It's a story. I don't know. That was all part of what I had to do from the beginning. I mean, as I said, I had this idea that this tourist would rescue the child. Then what? And that opened up a whole possibility, a whole range of possible plots. And how would that relate to the refugee women? And so that's how it began to unfold. Yeah. I will say something about something that was a challenge for me, which is describing life in Syria, Mina's life in Syria during the war. I did have my Syrian co-author and dear friend Iyad read every word of this book, so he could correct me, because I hadn't been to Syria. I was about to go when the war broke out, let alone lived there, and I'm not Muslim, and I haven't been through a civil war, and I'm not a refugee, and I'm white, and there's a whole bunch of things I had to unlearn, if you like, and he really helped me with that. But also I'd spent years and years and years listening to people, as I said, and absorbing not just their stories about being a refugee, but about their lives at home, stories about their lives at home from minute to minute. But still, I really wanted to get it right. I really, really wanted to get it right. So that was, it wasn't exactly a struggle, but it was it was a task and a goal.
As a reader, I felt that fidelity to the lives of the women. They felt very, very full and very vivid. This is a political novel. It's making a very passionate political argument, but part of that argument is simply made by juxtaposition. So, for instance, there's one place when Hilma, our white American, is complaining to her landlord about having to dispose of rubbish, of used toilet paper, with indignation. And why is Greek plumbing so wretched? And then almost immediately we're in the refugee camp and we see what Layla and Amina and Nafisa have to deal with in terms of refuse and rubbish and rats and
Right. No sanitation.
yeah.
Wait 3 hours for a shower,
Yeah.
4 hours sometimes, or for a meal. Yeah. I never want to write a novel that reads like a polemic, because that's the most horrible novel.
Yeah.
So it has to be, story and character have to be most important, and in that unfolds whatever message that a reader wants to take away from it.
And were there books that were, besides your own research, were there literary influences, literary ancestors to the good deed?
Yes, and this is going to surprise everyone because it has nothing to do with refugees or anything you might expect, which is Edna O'Brien's 1972 novella called Night. Any of you read it? Ever? I hadn't until recently, and it's just takes place in one night, and it's a woman, she can't sleep, and it's just like a stream of consciousness of her thoughts about her life, because it's Edna O'Brien, and it's told in this wonderful Irish lilt to it, and it's stunning, and that just got my writerly juices going, even though it's got nothing to do with this story. So that was very significant. I did read a lot of Syrian authors too, though, and there's a poet, a woman called Maram al-Masri, who wrote a collection called Liberty Walks Naked, which I found extremely moving, and about the war and about about what women have suffered under the war, as well as Syrians, and about what's happened, how she defines liberty, which is a loose translation from Arabic, which means more than, it means a mix of liberty and freedom, and we don't have the exact word in English, but you kind of get a sense of it from this beautiful book of poetry, so that was very influential too.
Yeah. I would never have guessed Edna O'Brien, how fabulous. One of the things that I admired technically was your use of the present tense, and how that seemed to capture the sort of stasis of the novel. The women just, day after day, they're in the camp, day after day. The possibility of asylum or of movement seems to recede. And the present tense sort of conveyed that to me very evocatively.
Sorry. Yeah, I really wanted to get across that terrible limbo that everybody is in when they live in refugee camps. But you have no control at all over your future, no say over where you're going to go or when. You can't work, you can't go to school. So all the kind of get up and go, the gumption, the bravery, the daring that it took to get you there starts to erode. All you can do is worry about your future, going round and round and round, and it really erodes the spirit. And of course, people fight it in every way they can, that erosion. But it's really hard when you have all your autonomy taken away from you in that way. So I wanted to get that across by getting the feeling of waiting happening in real time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they would tell the stories of their past, and that's in the past.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it's partly present tense, is so you can put the reader right there, living it all with the characters. And that's so much what I observed in the times I spent there.
I just want to go back to something you said earlier about Hilma and how you wanted to turn the white saviour sort of plot on its head, as it were.
Yeah.
Because to me, I mean, in many ways, she was a very sympathetic character, and the sense that she's living a posthumous life, if you will, that she's no longer the person she used to be, is very powerfully rendered in so many large and small ways. So even though I was exasperated with her at certain moments, I always felt very much in sympathy with her at the same time.
Okay, so influence 3, which has to do with this, Tolstoy. What I learned from Tolstoy is you never paint anybody as all good or all bad. People are much more complicated than that. And no character should be too small to ignore. You know, always rest your eyes on a character and fill them out as a full human being, even if they're just passing through the scene. And he's so brilliant at that. So I've always tried to do that as a writer. I think it's really important way to recognize people's humanity. So I guess, oh God, I've lost track of what you asked. But yeah, but that was, I suppose, the motivation for that. And Hilma. Yeah, Hilma's not, she's got her, well, there's a secret we're not going to spoil, but but she's got her, there are reasons. But she's one of those characters that different readers respond to really differently. Some people just are furious at her, and some people are really sympathetic, and some people are somewhere in between or torn, and you know, it's fun to create complicated characters like that because we're all complicated. None of us are angels, and none of us are all devils, except for a few people in power right now.
I think shortly it should be your turn to ask questions, but maybe before we turn to the audience, this would be a moment you might tell us what you're working on at present, or is it too early to say?
I'm going to read a quick little poem, if I may, by Fadi Judah, who is a Syrian poet who just won a big poetry prize called the Jackson Poetry Prize. It's called Mimesis. My daughter wouldn't hurt a spider that had nested between her bicycle handles. For 2 weeks, she waited until it left of its own accord. If you tear down the web, I said, it will simply know this isn't a place to call home, and you'd get to go biking. She said, that's how others become refugees, isn't it? That was kind of perfect. I'm working on a novel that's going to come out in 2026 called The Soldier's House, which is about an Iraqi widow and her family who arrive in the States as refugees and get taken in by an American soldier. Her husband had interpreted for him in the Iraq War, and he's trying to enact reparation because the husband was killed because of working for Americans. So on his side, he's trying to, find a way towards forgiveness and reparation. On her side, as far as she's concerned, she's moved in with the enemy but had no choice. So it's a novel with tension in this house between his family, her family, their cultures, the history of war, being enemies, but not trying to get over that, and raising the question of whether reparation and forgiveness are even possible in the aftermath of an unjust war.
It sounds wonderful, I can't wait. 2026, we'll all be back here. Questions for Helen? Things you want to ask?
First off, what you read was just beautiful.
Thank you so much.
I'm curious how these camps came about and who runs them and who's responsible, what goes on there, how that works.
Right. They were put up by the UN and in conjunction with the Greek government. And initially they were erected in 2015 on the islands because that's where most people were landing because it's so close to Turkey. But the idea that they were just processing centers. You know, they put people through quite quickly, got their papers and sent them to the mainland and bigger, better camps and where they could then move on to the rest of Europe. And that was working fairly well. But then in 2016, Western Europe and the EU said, we don't want these people in our lands. So they made a deal with Turkey and Greece called the Turkey-EU deal I'm trying to make this simple, but they enacted various ways to try and get people turned back to Turkey and to keep them from Spain. Of course, they didn't want brown Muslim people coming to Western Europe. And the result is that it created a backlog, and instead of just staying a few weeks in these camps, people were staying years. And that's when it started to deteriorate. And the UN had less and less to do with it, and the Greek government more and more. Then in 2019, a very right-wing government came in, anti-immigrant government came into Greece, and made it even harder for everybody. So thus the tragedy. That's one of the quickest political history lessons I've ever given. I hope you could follow it.
And what parallels do you see between the immigration crisis in Europe and Greece and what's happening in the United States at the border with Mexico? And do you have any interest in writing about that?
There are a lot of parallels. Remember I said the EU-Turkey deal was in 2016. Remember what else happened in 2016? So when former President Trump put in his Muslim ban and started firing immigration officials, and he enacted more than 100 laws to clog up immigration, the anti-immigration governments of Europe went, oh look, we can do that too. So it was closely related. It opened up permission in some ways. But that's not to ignore that there were other issues, of course. You know, that the Syrian war was going on in Afghanistan, Iraq was hardly over, various wars with Eritrea, Sudan, you know, there were many other countries in that region. And now we've got climate change, it's going to create another new wave. So it's not that there isn't there aren't challenges about how to deal with so many displaced people in the world, but dealing with them cruelly was all tied in. I don't know about whether I'll write about our own borders. I feel like there are millions of people doing that who can speak Spanish and know more about it than I do. I don't know, not that I can speak Arabic, but the thing about going to these countries is that so many people could speak English or French. And then, so I was able to interview people directly, a lot. Of course, lots of people from Latin America can speak English too. But anyhow, I don't know, there's only so many expertise as you can have in one lifetime. So we'll see. But I do follow it, and my heart and concern is very much there because, yes, there's so many similarities.
It's great listening to you. How did you connect with Samos at the refugee camps and so forth in the first place?
Well, I read, and somehow or other I heard about Samos. I can't even remember how. But then the question was, well, how do I get myself there? How do I make any inroads when I get there? So I did some research, and I found that there was the main NGO, and for a long time the only one, was a little organization called Samos Volunteers. And on their website they had, these are the donations we need, please. And one of the donations they needed was new underwear for kids. So I went to Walmart and I bought those giant packages they sell of little boy underwear and little girl underwear. The rules were no characters on them, no insignias, no American flags, just plain colors. Stuffed them into a suitcase, went to Samos, walked into the headquarters of the NGO and dumped all these underpants on the desk and said, here are these. I know you need them. Do you have any refugees here who can speak English? Who'd be willing to talk to me? And that's how it all began. It's all because of the underwear.
What's a good story?
I didn't want to go through any official channels. I didn't want to volunteer because there are all these rules limiting what you can do and where you can go and who you can talk to. I went totally as an independent person, and that way I could have tea with people, I could make friends with them, there were no rules telling me not to do things.
That's inspiring.
And also, by the way, it was very easy to meet people because that camp at the time was open. It was up on the hill above the town, so people could come and go as they wished, to sit on the beach or shop or sit in a cafe or just hang out in the park on their phones talking to people at home, their lifeline to home. So whenever I overheard anybody speaking English or French, I would accost them and offer them a coffee and say, I'm a writer and I'd just love to hear about your life here on the camp. And that's, I met people that way. It was amazingly easy. Everybody loves to be listened to. And especially when you're a new immigrant, and especially if you've come over as an asylum seeker or you've come through a rough journey, the only people who listen to you other than your fellow travelers are immigration officials who mostly want to find a way to not believe you, mostly want to trick you into say you're lying, you know asylum. They're not listening as a friend listens. They're not listening without judgment. So mostly people were very happy to talk to me because at last they had an ear and they needed an ear because they had gone through so much. They wanted to spill out. Yeah. Yes.
I also very much enjoyed what you did, and I would like to know, take sort of what you asked, go back even further, what got you started way back, or sparking that is able to do it.
When we invaded Iraq, that's what's triggered the whole thing. I had to do something about it. As a writer, what do I do but write? So I started off by interviewing women, American women who served in Iraq. And I went all over the country and I did a book and a play about American women veterans and what they had to say about the Iraq War, having seen it close up, and what they had to say about going through combat at a time when they were supposedly banned from combat. And a lot came out of that, including the deep racism and misogyny of the military and the astronomical rates of sexual assault. But then after a while, I realized, I've done the thing that all Americans do. I am both American and British. I keep talking about American, and I'm going, what? But, which is I've written about a war from only our point of view. That's what we're always doing. That's what we did in Vietnam, Afghanistan. We keep doing it. Took decades, at least a decade before we started writing anything about the Vietnamese point of view. So I thought, I want to talk to Iraqi refugees, and I found out that some 400 had been settled around Albany, New York, where I live part-time. So I was able to find them, and that's when I first started interviewing refugees and really got to know them. And that's actually a lot of what's going to inform my forthcoming book. But that's what got me interested in that subject originally. And when I first went to Samos, I thought I was going to find Iraqis who had been doubly displaced, who'd fled to Syria, as many did, and then Syria has its war, and then they fled again. And so that was the story I was originally following. But I fell in with Syrians instead. I only met one Iraqi, and that wasn't his story. So it changed direction because of happenstance. Great questions, by the way. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for writing Invisible War about us veterans. Appreciate it.
Are you a veteran? Yes. Well, thanks for coming and thanks for that. I didn't write the movie. but my book gave them the idea for it. Yes. And for the lawsuit, when that was what the movie featured, the people in the lawsuit, right, the swimming. That, God, I'll never forget that day when I got a call from a lawyer and she said, I figured out how to sue the Pentagon. That was a great moment. And Donald Rumsfeld, like, she was going to sue him too.
And I'm really glad that they're finally recognizing all of the toxic places and the toxic exposures
Yes.
that so many soldiers have gone through.
That was in my book too, the bomb, the poison, the depleted uranium, it was all in there. But it took a long time before anyone paid attention, and it wasn't because of me, but at least they are coming.
They're finally putting it into our records.
Yes, good, glad to hear it. About time. Yeah.
I am intrigued like you are about, you write both novel and nonfiction. What was the moment what was your first moment of saying I need to write something as a novel versus all the work you had done before as a nonfiction?
Well, actually, being a novelist was my first dream and my first love. So I always wanted to be a fiction writer since I was a little girl. So I have actually written more novels than non-fiction. But I couldn't make a living doing that. And I do have this political side. And so my parents were anthropologists. So I grew up learning to nose around in other people's lives and really interested in other cultures and other worlds, and I still love that. So it's a good combination of all those things. But I do find that I do believe that fiction gets much closer to the truth than non-fiction, because you can get inside people's hearts, even if you're making up a story. When I can interview someone for years and I will never get as deep into their heart as I can when I'm inventing. Because there are all these barriers. You don't want to exploit people, you don't want to invade their privacy, you don't want to hurt them. They have things they won't tell you. They have things they can't tell you, or don't know how to tell you. It goes on and on. There's so many barriers. That's the great problem with non-fiction. You can get close, but you can't get in, really in, to the heart. And I wanted to write about the whole experience from the inside out, not the outside in.
That's so beautifully said. Thank you.
A last question, or should we end on that inspiring note?
We used up our probably.
Thank you everyone so much. We have books at the back. Helen's going to move over to where Margot is, and we're going to have a sign.